Moths that fly by day are not properly to be called moths. They do not excite that pleasant sense of dark autumn nights and ivy blossom, which the commonest yellow underwing asleep in the shadow of the curtain never fails to rouse in us. They are hybrid creatures, neither gay like butterflies nor somber like their own species. Nevertheless, the present specimen, with his narrow hay-colored wings, fringed with a tassel of the same color, seemed to be content with life. It was a pleasant morning in mid-September, mild and benignant, yet with a keener breath than that of the summer months. The plow was already scoring the field opposite the window. Where the share had been, the earth was pressed flat and gleamed with moisture. Such vigor came rolling in from the fields and the down beyond, that it was difficult to keep the eyes strictly turned upon the book. The rooks, too, were keeping one of their annual festivities. They were soaring round the tree-tops until it looked as if a vast net with thousands of black knots in it had been cast up into the air. After a few moments, it sank slowly down upon the trees until every twig seemed to have a knot at the end of it. Then, suddenly, the net would be thrown into the air again, in a wider circle this time, with the utmost clamor and outcry. It was as though to be thrown into the air and settle slowly down upon the treetops were a tremendously exciting experience. The same energy which inspired the rooks, the ploughmen, the horses, and even, it seemed, the lean bareback downs sent the moth fluttering from side to side of his square of the window pane. One could not help watching him. One was, indeed, conscious of a queer feeling of pity for him. The possibilities of pleasure seemed that morning so enormous and so various, that to have only a moth's part in life, and a day moth's at that, appeared a hard fate. His zest in enjoying his meager opportunities to the full was pathetic. He flew vigorously to one corner of his compartment, and, after waiting there a second, flew across to the other. What remained for him but to fly to a third corner and then to a fourth? That was all he could do, in spite of the size of the downs, the width of the sky, the far-off smoke of houses, and the romantic voice, now and then, of a steamer out at sea. What he could do, he did. Watching him, it seemed as if a fiber, very thin but pure, of the enormous energy of the world had been thrust into his frail and diminutive body. As often as he crossed the pane, I could fancy that a thread of vital light became visible. He was little or nothing but life. Yet because he was so small and so simple a form of the energy that was rolling in at the open window, there was something marvelous as well as pathetic about him. This energy was driving its way through so many narrow and intricate corridors in my own brain and in those of other human beings. It was as if someone had taken a tiny bead of pure life and, decking it as lightly as possible with down and feathers, had set it dancing and zigzagging to show us the true nature of life. Thus displayed, one could not get over the strangeness of it. One is apt to forget all about life, seeing it humped and bossed, garnished and cumbered, so that it has to move with the greatest circumspection and dignity. Again, the thought of all that life might have been, had he been born in any other shape, caused one to view his simple activities with a kind of pity. After a time, tired by his dancing apparently, he settled on the window ledge in the sun. The queer spectacle being at an end, I forgot about him. Then, looking up, my eye was caught by him. He was trying to resume his dancing, but seemed either so stiff or so awkward that he could only flutter to the bottom of the window pane. When he tried to fly across it, he failed. Being intent on other matters, I watched these futile attempts for a time without thinking. I was unconsciously waiting for him to resume his flight, as one waits for a machine that has stopped momentarily to start again without considering the reason of its failure. After perhaps a seventh attempt, he slipped from the wooden ledge and fell, fluttering his wings, onto his back on the window sill. The helplessness of his attitude roused me. It flashed upon me that he was in difficulties. He could no longer raise himself. His legs struggled vainly. But, as I stretched out a pencil, meaning to help him to right himself, it came over me that the failure and awkwardness were the approach of death. I laid the pencil down again. The legs agitated themselves once more. I looked as if for the enemy against which he struggled. I looked out of doors. What had happened there? Presumably it was midday, and work in the fields had stopped. Stillness and quiet had replaced the previous animation. The birds had taken themselves off to feed in the brooks. The horses stood still, yet the power was there all the same. It was massed outside, indifferent, impersonal, and not attending to anything in particular. Somehow, it was opposed to the little hay-colored moth. It was useless to try to do anything. One could only watch the extraordinary efforts made by those tiny legs against an oncoming doom. A doom which could, had it chosen, have submerged an entire city. Not merely a city, but masses of human beings. Nothing, I knew, had any chance against death. Nevertheless, after a pause of exhaustion, the legs fluttered again. It was superb, this last protest. It was so frantic that he succeeded at last in righting himself. One's sympathies, of course, were all on the side of life. Also, when there was nobody to care or to know, this gigantic effort moved one strangely. This effort on the part of an insignificant little moth against a power of such magnitude, to retain what no one else valued or desired to keep. Again, somehow, one saw life a pure bead. I lifted the pencil again, useless though I knew it to be, but even as I did so, the unmistakable tokens of death showed themselves. The body relaxed and instantly grew stiff. The struggle was over. The insignificant little creature now knew death. As I looked at the dead moth, this minute wayside triumph filled me with wonder. The triumph of so great a force over so mean an antagonist. Just as life had been strange a few minutes before, so death was now as strange. The moth, having righted himself, now lay most decently and uncomplainingly composed. Oh yes, he seemed to say, death is stronger than I am. Evening is kind to Sussex, for Sussex is no longer young. She is grateful for the veil of evening, as an elderly woman is glad when a shade is drawn over a lamp, and only the outline of her face remains. The outline of Sussex is still very fine. The cliffs stand out to sea, one behind another. All Eastbourne, all Bexhill, all Street Linnets, their parades and their lodging houses, their bead shops and their sweet shops, their placards, their invalids and charza banks, are all obliterated. What remains is what there was when William came over from France 10 centuries ago, a line of cliffs running out to sea. Also, the fields are redeemed. The freckle of red villas on the coast is washed over by a thin, lucid lake of brown air, in which they and their redness are drowned. It was still too early for lamps, and too early for stars. But, I thought, there's always some sediment of irritation when the moment is as beautiful as it is now. The psychologists must explain. One looks up. One is overcome by beauty extravagantly greater than one could expect. There are now pink clouds over battle. The fields are marbled. One's perceptions blow out rapidly, like air balls expanded by some rush of air. And then, when all seems blown to its fullest and tautest, with beauty and beauty and beauty, a pin pricks. It collapses. But what is the pin? So far as I could tell, the pin had something to do with one's own impotency. I cannot hold this. I cannot express this. I'm overcome by it. I am mastered. Somewhere in that region, one's discontent lay, and it was allied with the idea that one's nature demands mastery over all that it receives. Mastery here meant the power to convey what one saw now over Sussex so that another person could share it. And further, there was another prick of the pin. One was wasting one's chance. For beauty spread at one's right hand, at one's left, and at one's back too. It was escaping all the time. One could only offer a thimble to a torrent that could fill baths, lakes. But relinquish, I said. It is well known how in circumstances like these the self splits up. One self is eager and dissatisfied, and the other stern and philosophical. Relinquish these impossible aspirations. Be content with the view in front of us, and believe me when I tell you that it is best to sit and soak, to be passive, to accept, and do not bother because nature has given you 6 little pocket knives with which to cut up the body of a whale. While these two selves then held a colloquy about the wise course to adopt in the presence of beauty, I, a third party now declared itself, said to myself, how happy they were to enjoy so simple an occupation. There they sat as the car sped along, noticing everything: a haystack, a rust-red roof, a pond, an old man coming home with his sack on his back. There they sat, matching every color in the sky and earth from their color box, rigging up little models of Sussex barns and farmhouses in the red light that would serve in the January gloom. But I, being somewhat different, sat aloof and melancholy. While they are thus busied, I said to myself, gone, gone, over, over, past and done with, past and done with. I feel life left behind, even as the road is left behind. We have been over that stretch and are already forgotten. There, windows were lit by our lamps for a second. The light is out now. Others come behind us. Then suddenly, a fourth self, a self which lies in ambush, apparently dormant, and jumps upon one unawares, said, look at that. Its remarks are often entirely disconnected with what has been happening, but must be attended to because of their very abruptness. It was a light, brilliant, freakish, inexplicable. For a second, I was unable to name it. A star. And for that second, it held its odd flicker of unexpectedness and danced and beamed. I take your meaning, I said. You, erratic and impulsive self that you are, feel that the light over the downs there emerging dangles from the future. Let's try to understand this. Let's reason it out. I feel suddenly attached, not to the past, but to the future. I think of Sussex in 500 years to come. I think much grossness will have evaporated. Things will have been scorched up, eliminated. There will be magic gates. Drafts fan blown by electric power will cleanse houses. Lights, intense and firmly directed, will go over the earth, doing the work. Look at the moving light in that hill. It is the headlight of a car. By day and by night, Sussex in 5 centuries will be full of charming thoughts, quick, effective beams. The sun was now low beneath the horizon. Darkness spread rapidly. None of my selves could see anything beyond the tapering light of our headlamps on the hedge. I summoned them together. Now, I said, comes the season of making up our accounts. Now we have got to collect ourselves. We have got to be oneself. Nothing is to be seen any more, except one wedge of road and bank which our lights repeat incessantly. We are perfectly provided for. We are warmly wrapped in a rug. We are protected from wind and rain. We are alone. Now is the time of reckoning. Now I, who preside over the company, am going to arrange and order the trophies which we have all brought in. Let me see. There was a great deal of beauty brought in today. Farmhouses, cliffs standing out to sea, marbled fields, mottled fields, red feathered skies, all that. Also, there was disappearance and the death of the individual, the vanishing road, and the window lit for a second and then dark. And then there was the sudden dancing light that was hung in the future. What we have made then today, I said, is this, that beauty, death of the individual, and the future. Look, I will make a little figure for your satisfaction. Here he comes. Does this little figure advancing through beauty, through death, to the economical, powerful, and efficient future, when houses will be cleansed by a puff of hot wind, satisfy you? Look at him, there on my knee. We sat and looked at the figure we had made that day. Great sheer slabs of rock, tree-tufted, surrounded him. He was for a second very, very solemn. Indeed, it seemed as if the reality of things were displayed there on the rug. A violent thrill ran through us, as if a charge of electricity had entered into us. We cried out together, yes, yes, as if affirming something in a moment of recognition. And then the body, who had been silent up to now, began its song, almost at first as low as the rush of the wheels. Eggs and bacon, toast and tea, fire in a bath, jugged hare, it went on, and red currant jelly, a glass of wine with coffee to follow, and then to bed, and then to bed. Off with you, I said to my assembled selves. Your work is done. I dismiss you. Good night. and the rest of the journey was performed in the delicious society of my own body. The first picture. It is impossible that one should not see pictures, because if my father was a blacksmith and yours was a peer of the realm, we must needs be pictures to each other. We cannot possibly break out of the frame of the picture by speaking natural words. You see me leaning against the door of the smithy with a horseshoe in my hand, and you think as you go by, how picturesque. Seeing you sitting so much at your ease in the car, almost as if you were going to bow to the populace, think, what a picture of old, luxurious, aristocratical England. We are both quite wrong in our judgments, no doubt, but that is inevitable. So now, at the turn of the road, I saw one of these pictures. It might have been called The Sailor's Homecoming, or some such title. A fine young sailor carrying a bundle, a girl with her hand on his arm, neighbors gathering round, a cottage garden ablaze with flowers. As one passed, one read at the bottom of that picture that the sailor was back from China. There was a fine spread waiting for him in the parlor. He had a present for his young wife in his bundle, and she was soon going to bear him their first child. Everything was right and good, and, as it should be, one felt about that picture. There was something wholesome and satisfactory in the sight of such happiness. Life seemed sweeter and more enviable than before. So thinking, I passed them, filling the picture as fully, as completely as I could. I noticed the color of her dress, of his eyes, and saw the sandy cat slinking round the cottage door. For some time, the picture floated in my eyes, making most things appear much brighter, warmer, and simpler than usual. It made some things appear foolish, and some things wrong, and some things right, and more full of meaning than before. At odd moments during that day and the next, the picture returned to one's mind. One thought with envy, but with kindness, of the happy sailor and his wife. One wondered what they were doing, what they were saying now. The imagination supplied other pictures, springing from that first one. A picture of the sailor cutting firewood or drawing water, and they talked about China. The girl set his present on the chimney piece, where everyone who came could see it. She sewed at her baby clothes, and all the doors and windows were open into the garden, so that the birds were flittering and the bees humming. And Rogers, that was his name, could not say how much to his liking all this was after the China seas, as he smoked his pipe with his foot in the garden. The second picture. In the middle of the night, a loud cry rang through the village. Then there was a sound of something scuffling, and then dead silence. All that could be seen out of the window was the branch of a lilac tree, hanging motionless and ponderous across the road. It was a hot, still night. There was no moon. The cry made everything seem ominous. Who had cried? Why had she cried? It was a woman's voice, made by some extremity of feeling almost sexless, almost expressionless. It was as if human nature had cried out against some iniquity, some inexpressible horror. There was dead silence. The stars shone perfectly steadily. The fields lay still. The trees were motionless. Yet all seemed guilty, convicted, ominous. One felt that something ought to be done. Some light ought to appear, tossing, moving agitatedly. Someone ought to come running down the road. There should be lights in the cottage windows. And then, perhaps, another cry, but less sexless, less wordless, comforted, appeased. But no light came. No feet were heard. There was no second cry. The first had been swallowed up, and there was dead silence. One lay in the dark, listening intently. It had been merely a voice. There was nothing to connect it with. No picture of any sort came to interpret it, to make it intelligible to the mind. But, as the dark arose at last, all one saw was an obscure human form, almost without shape, raising a gigantic arm in vain against some overwhelming iniquity. The third picture. The fine weather remained unbroken. Had it not been for that single cry in the night, one would have felt that the earth had put into harbor, that life had ceased to drive before the wind, that it had reached some quiet cove and there lay anchored, hardly moving, on the quiet waters. But the sound persisted. Wherever one went, it might be for a long walk up into the hills, something seemed to turn uneasily beneath the surface. It made the peace, the stability all round one, seem a little unreal. There are the sheep clustered on the side of the hill. The valley broke and long, tapering waves like the fall of smooth waters. One came on solitary farmhouses. The puppy rolled in the yard. The butterflies gamboled over the gorse. All was as quiet, as safe as could be. Yet one kept thinking, a cry had rent it. All this beauty had been an accomplice that night. It had consented to remain calm, to be still beautiful. At any moment, it might be sundered again. This goodness, this safety, were only on the surface. And then, to cheer oneself out of this apprehensive mood, one turned to the picture of the sailor's homecoming. One saw it all over again, producing various little details. The blue color of her dress, the shadow that fell from the yellow flowering tree that one had not used before. So they had stood at the cottage door, he with his bundle on his back, she just lightly touching his sleeve with her hand, and a sandy cat had slunk round the door. Thus, gradually going over the picture in every detail, one persuaded oneself by degrees that it was far more likely that this calm and content and good will lay beneath the surface than anything treacherous or sinister. The sheep grazing, the waves of the valley, the farmhouse, the puppy, the dancing butterflies were in fact like that all through. And so, one turned back home, with one's mind fixed on the sailor and his wife. One made up picture after picture of them, so that one picture after another of happiness and satisfaction might be laid over that unrest, that hideous cry, until it was crushed and silenced by their pressure out of existence. Here at last was the village, and the churchyard through which one must pass. The usual thought came, as one entered it, of the peacefulness of the place with its shady yews, its rubbed tombstones, its nameless graves. Death is cheerful here, one felt. Indeed, look at that picture. A man was digging a grave, and children were picnicking at the side of it while he worked. As the shovels of yellow earth were thrown up, the children were sprawling about, eating bread and jam, and drinking milk out of large mugs. The gravedigger's wife, a fat, fair woman, had propped herself against a tombstone and spread her apron on the grass by the open grave to serve as a tea table. Some lumps of clay had fallen among the tea things. Who was going to be buried? I asked. Had old Mr. Dotson died at last? Oh, no, the woman answered, staring at me. It's for young Rogers, the sailor. He died 2 nights ago of some foreign fever. Didn't you hear his wife? She rushed into the road and cried out. Then she turned away. Here, Tommy, you're all covered with earth. What a picture made. Old Mrs. Gray. There are moments, even in England, now, when even the busiest, most contented, suddenly let fall what they hold. It may be the week's washing. Sheets and pajamas crumble and dissolve in their hands. Because, though they do not state this in so many words, it seems silly to take the washing round to Mrs. Peel. When out there, over the fields, over the hills, there is no washing. No pinning of clothes to lines. No mangling and ironing. No work at all but boundless rest. Stainless and boundless rest. Space unlimited. Untrodden grass. Wild birds flying. Hills whose smooth uprise continue that wild flight. Of all this, however, only 7 foot by 4 could be seen from Mrs. Gray's corner. That was the size of her front door, which stood wide open, though there was a fire burning in the grate. The fire looked like a small spot of dusty light, feebly trying to escape from the embarrassing pressure of the pouring sunshine. Mrs. Gray sat on a hard chair in the corner, looking, but at what? Apparently at nothing. She did not change the focus of her eyes when visitors came in. Her eyes had ceased to focus themselves. It may be that they had lost the power. They were aged eyes, blue, unspectacled. They could see, but without looking. She had never used her eyes on anything minute and difficult, merely upon faces and dishes and fields. And now, at the age of 92, they saw nothing but a zigzag of pain wriggling across the door. Pain that twisted her legs as it wriggled. Pain that jerked her body to and fro like a marionette. Her body was wrapped around the pain, as a damp sheet is folded over a wire. The wire was spasmodically jerked by a cruel, invisible hand. She flung out a foot, a hand. Then it stopped. She sat still for a moment. In that pause, she saw herself in the past, at 10, at 20, at 25. She was running in and out of a cottage with 11 brothers and sisters. The line jerked. She was thrown forward in her chair. "All dead," she mumbled. "All dead. My brothers and sisters. And my husband gone. My daughter too. But I go on. Every morning I pray God to let me pass." The morning spread, 7 foot by 4, green and sunny. Like a fling of grain, the birds settled on the land. She was jerked again by another tweak of the tormenting hand. "I'm an ignorant old woman," she said. "I can't read or write. And every morning when I crawls downstairs, I say, I wish it were night. And every night when I crawls up to bed, I say, I wish it were day. I'm only an ignorant old woman. By praise to God, oh, let me pass. I'm an ignorant old woman. I can't read or write." So, when the color went out of the doorway, she could not see the other page which is then lit up. She could not hear the voices that have argued, sung, talked for hundreds of years. The jerked limbs were still again. "The doctor comes every week," she went on. "The parish doctor now. Since my daughter went, we can't afford Dr. Nichols. But he's a good man. He says he wonders I don't go. He says my heart's nothing but wind and water. Yet I don't seem able to die. So we, humanity, insist that the body shall still cling to the wire. We put out the eyes and the ears, but we pinion either with a bottle of medicine, a cup of tea, a dying fire, like a rook on a barn door, but a rook that still lives, even with a nail through it." Virginia Woolf. Street Magic, a London Adventure. No one perhaps has ever felt passionately toward a lead pencil, but there are circumstances in which it can become supremely desirable to possess one. There are moments when we are set upon having an object, an excuse for walking half across London between tea and dinner. As the fox hunter hunts in order to preserve the breed of foxes, and the golfer plays in order that open spaces may be preserved from the builders. So, when the desire comes upon us to go street rambling, the pencil does for a pretext. Getting up, we say, "Really, I must buy a pencil." As if under cover of this excuse, we could indulge safely in the greatest pleasure of town life in winter, rambling the streets of London. The hour should be the evening and the season winter. For in winter, the champagne brightness of the air and the sociability of the streets are grateful. We are not then taunted, as in the summer, by the longing for shade and solitude and sweet airs from the hayfields. The evening hour, too, gives us the irresponsibility which darkness and lamplight bestow. We are no longer quite ourselves. As we step out of the house on a fine evening between 4 and 6, we shed the self our friends know us by. We become part of that vast Republican army of anonymous trampers, whose society is so agreeable after the solitude of one's own room. For there, we sit surrounded by objects which perpetually express the oddity of our own temperaments and enforce the memories of our own experience. That bowl on the mantelpiece, for instance, was bought at Mantua on a windy day. We were leaving the shop when a sinister old woman plucked at our skirts and said she would find herself starving one of these days. "Take it," she cried, and thrust the blue and white china bowl into our hands, as if she never wanted to be reminded of her quixotic generosity. So, guiltily, but suspecting nevertheless how badly we had been fleeced, we carried it back to the little hotel. There, in the middle of the night, the innkeeper quarreled so violently with his wife that we all leaned out into the courtyard to look. We saw the vines laced about among the pillars, and the stars white in the sky. The moment was stabilized. It was stamped like a coin indelibly among a million that slipped by imperceptibly. There, too, was the melancholy Englishman, who rose among the coffee cups and the little iron tables, and revealed the secrets of his soul, as travelers do. All this, Italy, the windy morning, the vines laced about the pillars, the Englishman and the secrets of his soul, rise up in a cloud from the china bowl on the mantelpiece. And there, as our eyes fall to the floor, is that brown stain on the carpet. Mr. Lloyd George made that. "The man's a devil," said Mr. Cummings, putting the kettle down with which he was about to fill the teapot, so that it burnt a brown ring on the carpet. But when the door shuts on us, all that vanishes. The shell-like covering which our souls have excreted to house themselves, to make for themselves a shape distinct from others, is broken. There is left of all these wrinkles and roughnesses a central oyster of perceptiveness, an enormous eye. How beautiful a street is in winter! It is at once revealed and obscured. Here vaguely one can trace symmetrical straight avenues of doors and windows. Here under the lamps are floating islands of pale light, through which pass quickly bright men and women. For all their poverty and shabbiness, they were a certain look of unreality, an air of triumph, as if they had given life the slip, so that life, deceived of her prey, blunders on without them. But, after all, we are only gliding smoothly on the surface. The eye is not a miner, not a diver, not a seeker after buried treasure. It floats us smoothly down a stream. Resting, pausing, the brain sleeps perhaps as it looks. How beautiful a London street is then, with its islands of light and its long groves of darkness. On one side of it, perhaps some tree-sprinkled, grass-grown space where night is folding herself to sleep naturally. As one passes the iron railing, one hears those little cracklings and stirrings of leaf and twig, which seem to suppose the silence of fields all round them, an owl hooting, and far away the rattle of a train in a valley. But this is London, we are reminded. High among the bare trees are hung oblong frames of reddish-yellow light. Windows. There are points of brilliance burning steadily like low stars. Lamps. This empty ground, which holds the country in it and its peace, is only a London square. It is set about by offices and houses where at this hour fierce lights burn over maps, over documents, over desks where clerks sit, turning with wetted forefinger the files of endless correspondences. Or, more suffusedly, the firelight wavers and the lamplight falls upon the privacy of some drawing-room. Its easy chairs, its papers, its china, its inlaid table, and the figure of a woman, accurately measuring out the precise number of spoons of tea. She looks at the door, as if she heard a ring downstairs, and somebody asking, "Is she in?" But here we must stop peremptorily. We are in danger of digging deeper than the eye approves. We are impeding our passage down the smooth stream by catching at some branch or root. At any moment, the sleeping army may stir itself and waken us 1,000 violins and trumpets in response. The army of human beings may rouse itself and assert all its oddities, its sufferings, and its sordidities. Let us dally a little longer. Let us be content still with surfaces only, the glossy brilliance of the motor omnibuses, the carnal splendor of the butcher's shops, with their yellow flanks and purple stakes, the blue and red bunches of flowers burning so bravely through the plate glass of the florist's windows. For the eye has this strange property. It rests only on beauty. Like a butterfly, it seeks color and basks in warmth. On a winter's night like this, when nature has been at pains to polish and preen herself, it brings back the prettiest trophies. It breaks off little lumps of emerald and coral, as if the whole earth were made of precious stone. The thing it cannot do, one is speaking of the average unprofessional eye, is to compose these trophies in such a way as to bring out the more obscure angles and relationships. Hence, after a prolonged diet of this simple, sugary fare of beauty pure and uncomposed, we become conscious of satiety. We halt at the door of the boot shop. We make some little excuse, which has nothing to do with the real reason, for folding up the bright paraphernalia of the streets. We withdraw to some duskier chamber of the being, where we may ask, as we raise our left foot obediently upon the stand, "What, then, is it like to be a dwarf?" She came in escorted by 2 women. Being of normal size, they looked like benevolent giants beside her. Smiling at the shop girls, they seemed to be disclaiming any lot in her deformity and assuring her of their protection. She wore the peevish yet apologetic expression usual on the faces of the deformed. She needed their kindness, yet she resented it. But when the shop girl had been summoned, and the giantesses, smiling indulgently, had asked for shoes for this lady, the girl pushed the little stand in front of her. The dwarf stuck her foot out with an impetuosity which seemed to claim all our attention. "Look at that! Look at that!" she seemed to demand of us all as she thrust her foot out. For behold, it was the shapely, perfectly proportioned foot of a well-grown woman. It was arched. It was aristocratic. Her whole manner changed as she looked at it resting on the stand. She looked soothed and satisfied. Her manner became full of self-confidence. She sent for shoe after shoe. She tried on pair after pair. She got up and pirouetted before a glass which reflected the foot only, in yellow shoes, in fawn shoes, in shoes of lizard skin. She raised her little skirts and displayed her little legs. She was thinking that, after all, feet are the most important part of the whole person. Women, she said to herself, have been loved for their feet alone. Seeing nothing but her feet, she imagined perhaps that the rest of her body was of a piece with those beautiful feet. She was shabbily dressed, but she was ready to lavish any money upon her shoes. And as this was the only occasion upon which she was not afraid of being looked at, but positively craved attention, she was ready to use any device to prolong the choosing and fitting. "Look at my feet," she seemed to be saying as she took a step this way, and Thena stepped that way. The shop girl, good-humoredly, must have said something flattering, for suddenly her face lit up in ecstasy. But, after all, the giantesses, benevolent though they were, had their own affairs to see to. She must make up her mind. She must decide which to choose. At length, the pair was chosen, and, as she walked out between her guardians, with a parcel swinging from her finger, the ecstasy faded. Knowledge returned. The old peevishness, the old apology came back, and by the time she had reached the street again, she had become a dwarf only. But she had changed the mood. She had called into being an atmosphere which, as we followed her out into the street, seemed actually to create the humped, the twisted, the deformed. Two bearded men, brothers, apparently stone-blind, supporting themselves by resting a hand on the head of a small boy between them, marched down the street. On they came with the unyielding yet tremulous tread of the blind, which seems to lend to their approach something of the terror and inevitability of the fate that has overtaken them. As they passed, holding straight on, the little convoy seemed to cleave asunder the passers-by, with the momentum of its silence, its directness, its disaster. Indeed, the dwarf had started a hobbling, grotesque dance, to which everybody in the street now conformed. The stout lady tightly swathed in shiny sealskin, the feeble-minded boy sucking the silver knob off his stick, the old man squatted on a doorstep, as if, suddenly overcome by the absurdity of the human spectacle, he had sat down to look at it. All joined in the hobble and tap of the dwarf's dance. In what crevices and crannies, one might ask, did they lodge, this maimed company of the halt and the blind? Here, perhaps, in the top rooms of these narrow old houses between Holborn and Soho, where people have such queer names and pursue so many curious trades. There are gold beaters, accordion pleaters, and cover buttons, where they support life, with even greater fantasticality, upon a traffic in cups without saucers, china umbrella handles, and highly colored pictures of martyred saints. There they lodge, and it seems as if the lady in the sealskin jacket must find life tolerable, passing the time of day with the accordion pleater or the man who covers buttons. Life, which is so fantastic, cannot be altogether tragic. They do not grudge us. We are musing our prosperity, when suddenly, turning the corner, we come upon a bearded Jew, wild, hunger-bitten, glaring out of his misery. Or we pass the humped body of an old woman, flung abandoned on the step of a public building, with a cloak over her like the hasty covering thrown over a dead horse or donkey. At such sights, the nerves of the spine seem to stand erect. A sudden flare is brandished in our eyes. A question is asked which is never answered. Often enough, these derelicts choose to lie not a stone's throw from theaters, within hearing of barrel organs. Almost as night draws on, within touch of the sequined cloaks and bright legs of diners and dancers. They lie close to those shop windows where commerce offers to a world of old women laid on doorsteps, of blind men, of hobbling dwarfs, sofas which are supported by the gilt necks of proud swans, tables inlaid with baskets of many-colored fruit, sideboards paved with green marble, the better to support the weight of boars' heads, and carpets so softened with age that their carnations have almost vanished in a pale green sea. Passing, glimpsing, everything seems accidentally but miraculously sprinkled with beauty, as if the tide of trade, which deposits its burden so punctually and prosaically upon the shores of Oxford Street, had this night cast up nothing but treasure. With no thought of buying, the eye is sportive and generous. It creates, it adorns, it enhances. Standing out in the street, one may build up all the chambers of an imaginary house, and furnish them at one's will with sofa, table, carpet. That rug will do for the hall. That alabaster bowl shall stand on a carved table in the window. Our merrymaking shall be reflected in that thick, round mirror. But, having built and furnished the house, one is happily under no obligation to possess it. One can dismantle it in the twinkling of an eye, and build and furnish another house with other chairs and other glasses. Or, let us indulge ourselves at the antique jewelers, among the trays of rings and the hanging necklaces. Let us choose those pearls, for example, and then imagine how, if we put them on, life would be changed. It becomes instantly between 2 and 3 in the morning. The lamps are burning very white in the deserted streets of Mayfair. Only motor cars are abroad at this hour, and one has a sense of emptiness, of airiness, of secluded gaiety. Wearing pearls, wearing silk, one steps out onto a balcony which overlooks the gardens of sleeping Mayfair. There are a few lights in the bedrooms of great peers returned from court, of silk-stockinged footmen, of dowagers who have pressed the hands of statesmen. A cat creeps along the garden wall. Love-making is going on sibilantly, seductively, in the darker places of the room behind thick green curtains. Strolling sedately, as if he were promenading a terrace beneath which the shires and counties of England lie sun-bathed. The aged prime minister recounts to Lady So-and-so, with the curls and the emeralds, the true history of some great crisis in the affairs of the land. We seem to be riding on the top of the highest mast of the tallest ship, and yet, at the same time, we know that nothing of this sort matters. Love is not proved thus, nor great achievements completed thus, so that we sport with the moment and preen our feathers in it lightly, as we stand on the balcony, watching the moonlit cat creep along Princess Mary's garden wall. But what could be more absurd? It is, in fact, on the stroke of 6. It is a winter's evening. We are walking to the Strand to buy a pencil. How, then, are we also on a balcony, wearing pearls in June? What could be more absurd? Yet it is nature's folly, not ours. When she set about her chief masterpiece, the making of man, she should have thought of one thing only. Instead, turning her head, looking over her shoulder, into each one of us, she let creep instincts and desires which are utterly at variance with his main being, so that we are streaked, variegated, all of a mixture. The colors have run. Is the true self this which stands on the pavement in January, or that which bends over the balcony in June? Am I here, or am I there? Or is the true self neither this nor that, neither here nor there, but something so varied and wandering that it is only when we give the rein to its wishes and let it take its way unimpeded that we are indeed ourselves? Circumstances compel unity. For convenience' sake, a man must be a whole. The good citizen, when he opens his door in the evening, must be banker, golfer, husband, father, not a nomad wandering the desert, a mystic staring at the sky, a debauchee in the slums of San Francisco, a soldier heading a revolution, a pariah howling with skepticism and solitude. When he opens his door, he must run his fingers through his hair and put his umbrella in the stand like the rest. Of course, we must not forget that London second-hand bookshops are legendary for creating this exact kind of escape, housing centuries of these fragmented souls on their shelves. But here, none too soon, are the second-hand bookshops. Here we find anchorage in these thwarting currents of being. Here we balance ourselves after the splendors and miseries of the streets. The very sight of the bookseller's wife, with her foot on the fender, sitting beside a good coal fire, screened from the door, is sobering and cheerful. She is never reading or only the newspaper. Her talk, when it leaves bookselling, which it does so gladly, is about hats. She likes a hat to be practical, she says, as well as pretty. Oh no, they don't live at the shop. They live in Brixton. She must have a bit of green to look at. In summer, a jar of flowers grown in her own garden is stood on the top of some dusty pile to enliven the shop. Books are everywhere, and always the same sense of adventure fills us. Secondhand books are wild books, homeless books. They have come together in vast flocks of variegated feather, and have a charm which the domesticated volumes of the library lack. Besides, in this random, miscellaneous company, we may rub against some complete stranger who will, with luck, turn into the best friend we have in the world. There is always a hope as we reach down some grayish-white book from an upper shelf, directed by its air of shabbiness and desertion, of meeting here with Alman, who set out on horseback over 100 years ago to explore the woolen market in the Midlands and Wales. And a known traveler who stayed at inns, drank his pint, noted pretty girls and serious customs. He wrote it all down stiffly, laboriously, for sheer love of it. The book was published at his own expense. He was infinitely prosy, busy, and matter-of-fact. And so, he let flow in, without his knowing it, the very scent of hollyhocks and the hay, together with such a portrait of himself as gives him forever a seat in the warm corner of the mind's inglenook. One may buy him for 18 pence now. He is marked 3 and 6 pence. But the bookseller's wife, seeing how shabby the covers are, and how long the book has stood there since it was bought at some sale at a gentleman's library in Suffolk, will let it go at that. Thus, glancing round the bookshop, we make other such sudden, capricious friendships with the unknown and the vanished, whose only record is, for example, this little book of poems, so fairly printed, so finely engraved, too, with a portrait of the author. For he was a poet and drowned untimely, and his verse, mild as it is, and formal, and sententious, sends forth still a frail, fluty sound, like that of a piano organ played in some back street resignedly by an old Italian organ grinder in a corduroy jacket. There are travelers, too, row upon row of them, still testifying, indomitable spinsters that they were, to the discomforts that they endured in the sunsets they admired in Greece when Queen Victoria was a girl. A tour in Cornwall with a visit to the tin mines was thought worthy of the luminous record. People went slowly up the Rhine and did portraits of each other in Indian ink, sitting reading on deck beside a coil of rope. They measured the pyramids, were lost to civilization for years, converted Negroes in pestilential swamps. This packing up and going off, exploring deserts and catching fevers, settling in India for a lifetime, penetrating even to China, and then returning to lead a parochial life at Edmonton, tumbles and tosses upon the dusty floor like an uneasy sea. So restless the English are, with the waves at their very door. The waters of travel and adventure seem to break upon little islands of serious effort and lifelong industry, stood in jagged column upon the floor. In these piles of puce-bound volumes with gilt monograms on the back, thoughtful clergymen expound the Gospels. Scholars are to be heard with their hammers and their chisels, chipping clear the ancient texts of Euripides and Aeschylus. Thinking, annotating, expounding goes on at a prodigious rate all around us. And over everything, like a punctual, everlasting tide, washes the ancient sea of fiction. Innumerable volumes tell how Arthur loved Laura, and they were separated, and they were unhappy, and then they met, and they were happy ever after, as was the way when Victoria ruled these islands. The number of books in the world is infinite. One is forced to glimpse and nod and move on after a moment of talk, a flash of understanding. Just as in the street outside, one catches a word in passing, and from a chance phrase fabricates a lifetime. It is about a woman called Kate that they are talking. I said to her quite straight last night, someone says, "If you don't think I'm worth a penny stamp," I said, "but who Kate is, and to what crisis in their friendship that penny stamp refers, we shall never know. For Kate sinks under the warmth of their volubility. And here, at the street corner, Another page of the volume of life is laid open by the sight of two men consulting under the lamppost. They are spelling out the latest wire from Newmarket in the Stop Press News. Do they think, then, that fortune will ever convert their rags into fur and broadcloth, sling them with watch chains, and plant diamond pins where there is now a ragged open shirt? But the main stream of walkers at this hour sweeps too fast to let us ask such questions. They are wrapped, in this short passage from work to home, in some narcotic dream, now that they are free from the desk and have the fresh air on their cheeks. They put on those bright clothes which they must hang up and lock the key upon all the rest of the day. They are great cricketers, famous actresses, soldiers who have saved their country at the hour of need. Dreaming, gesticulating, often muttering a few words aloud, they sweep over the Strand and across Waterloo Bridge, from whence they will be slung in long, rattling trains to some prim little villa in Barnes or Surbiton, where the sight of the clock in the hall and the smell of the supper in the basement puncture the dream. But we are come to the Strand now, and as we hesitate on the curb, a little rod about the length of one's finger begins to lay its bar across the velocity and abundance of life. Really I must, that is it. Without investigating the demand, the mind cringes to the accustomed tyrant. One always must, do something or other. It is not allowed one simply to enjoy oneself. Was it not for this reason that, some time ago, we fabricated the excuse and invented the necessity of buying something? But what was it? Ah, we remember. It was a pencil. Let us go then and buy this pencil. But just as we are turning to obey the command, another self disputes the right of the tyrant to insist. The usual conflict comes about. Spread out behind the rod of duty, we see the whole breadth of the River Thames, wide, mournful, peaceful, and we see it through the eyes of somebody who is leaning over the embankment on a summer evening without a care in the world. Let us put off buying the pencil. Let us go in search of this person. And soon it becomes apparent that this person is ourselves. For if we could stand there, where we stood 6 months ago, should we not be again as we were then, calm, aloof, content? Let's try then. But the river is rougher and grayer than we remembered. The tide is running out to sea. It brings down with it a tug and 2 barges, whose load of straw is tightly bound down beneath tarpaulin covers. There is, too, close by us, a couple leaning over the balustrade, with the curious lack of self-consciousness lovers have, as if the importance of the affair they are engaged on claims, without question, the indulgence of the human race. The sights we see and the sounds we hear now have none of the quality of the past, nor have we any share in the serenity of the person who, 6 months ago, stood precisely where we stand now. His is the happiness of death, ours the insecurity of life. He has no future. The future is even now invading our peace. It is only when we look at the past and take from it the element of uncertainty that we can enjoy perfect peace. As it is, we must turn. We must cross the Strand again. We must find a shop where, even at this hour, they will be ready to sell us a pencil. It is always an adventure to enter a new room, for the lives and characters of its owners have distilled their atmosphere into it. And directly we enter it, we breast some new wave of emotion. Here, without a doubt, in the stationer's shop, people had been quarreling. Their anger shot through the air. They both stopped. The old woman, they were husband and wife evidently, retired to a back room. The old man, whose rounded forehead and globular eyes would have looked well on the frontispiece of some Elizabethan folio, stayed to serve us. A pencil, he repeated, certainly, certainly. He spoke with the distraction, yet effusiveness, of one whose emotions have been roused and checked in full flood. He began opening box after box and shutting them again. He said that it was very difficult to find things when they kept so many different articles. He launched into a story about some legal gentleman who had got into deep waters owing to the conduct of his wife. He had known him for years. He had been connected with the temple for half a century, he said, as if he wished his wife in the back room to overhear him. He upset a box of rubber bands. At last, exasperated by his incompetence, he pushed the swing door open and called out roughly, "Where'd you keep the pencils?" as if his wife had hidden them. The old lady came in. Looking at nobody, she put her hand with a fine air of righteous severity upon the right box. There were pencils. How then could he do without her? Was she not indispensable to him? In order to keep them there, standing side by side in forced neutrality, one had to be particular in one's choice of pencils. This was too soft, that too hard. They stood silently looking on. The longer they stood there, the calmer they grew. Their heat was going down, their anger disappearing. Now, without a word said on either side, the quarrel was made up. The old man, who would not have disgraced Ben Jonson's title page, reached the box back to its proper place, bowed profoundly his good night to us, and they disappeared. She would get out her sewing, he would read his newspaper, the canary would scatter them impartially with seed. The quarrel was over. In these minutes, in which a ghost has been sought for, a quarrel composed, and a pencil bought, the streets had become completely empty. Life had withdrawn to the top floor, and lamps were lit. The pavement was dry and hard. The road was of hammered silver. Walking home through the desolation, one could tell oneself the story of the dwarf, of the blind men, of the party in the Mayfair mansion, of the quarrel in the stationer's shop. Into each of these lives one could penetrate a little way, far enough to give oneself the illusion that one is not tethered to a single mind, but can put on briefly, for a few minutes, the bodies and minds of others. One could become a washerwoman, a publican, a street singer. And what greater delight and wonder can there be than to leave the straight lines of personality and deviate into those footpaths that lead beneath brambles and thick tree trunks, into the heart of the forest where live those wild beasts, our fellow men. That is true. To escape is the greatest of pleasures. Street haunting in winter, the greatest of adventures. Still, as we approach our own doorstep again, it is comforting to feel the old possessions, the old prejudices fold us round, and the self, which has been blown about at so many street corners, which is battered like a moth at the flame of so many inaccessible lanterns, sheltered and enclosed. Here again is the usual door. Here is the chair turned as we left it, and the china bowl, and the brown ring on the carpet. And here, let us examine it tenderly, let us touch it with reverence, is the only spoil we have retrieved from all the treasures of the city, a lead pencil.